put your hand up against me. I don't want to hit you.
Why do you interfere with it? I'm going to call the cops on you.
I don't want to hit you, man. Stay out of my face.
Today, we become legends.
With Smite 2's unleashed item system, any god can crit, and we've already seen plenty of shenanigans unfold as players try to find the best way to abuse crit chance in Smite 2's new system. But which god has the absolute biggest crit in Smite 2 right now? Let's jump in. So first up, some ground rules on how I'm testing this. Firstly, no assistance from other gods is allowed, only the god we're testing. Active items and consumables are allowed, but jungle buffs and fire giant and stuff like that are not. The testing was done against a standard level 20 Ymir who has 2438 max health, 81 physical and 60 magical protections. I'm aware this isn't absolutely fair and gives a slight advantage to magical gods, but other than calculating the numbers theoretically, this was the only way in Smite 2's limited testing environment to properly do this. I'll explain any god specific stuff and builds as we go, but those are the general 3 ground rules for our crit testing. So let's jump in with the gods from smallest to biggest crits. So just an FYI, I didn't test every god for obvious reasons. Some are just default 100% strength, 20% int basic attacks with no unique ways to boost their damage, and therefore are pointless to test because they just lose to a god with any way to boost their basic attack damage like the ones on this list. Jumping in with our first god though, which is the closest to that generic crit line, that being Jingway. She's already become notorious in Smite 2 for her abuse of crit, especially in AoE with her 2, but how does she stack up in terms of getting the largest crit possible? Let's take a look. Jingway's unique boost comes from her 2, which makes her basic attack deal 115% of normal damage, which puts her just a tick above any standard god with the same build. She came out to a grand total of 1127 damage on her Hydra's boosted crit. Speaking of the build, this is what I came up for the highest possible strength build. Of course, Hydra's is in there for the 30% boost, Deathbringer for the 25% crit damage boost, and the rest are just the max possible strength items. Transcendence for obvious reasons, Avatar's Parashu for the active 20% strength boost, Death Metal which has 65 strength alone with the active boost, and even has 100% intelligence as a nice bonus. This only adds 20 damage for normal basic attacks compared to 65 from the strength component, but it's basically free since 65 strength is already top tier on Death Metal. And finally we have Dagger of Frenzy which has 40 strength but also adds 40 basic attack damage from the active, meaning it effectively has the equivalent of 80 strength. Death's Embrace was chosen as the starter purely because 35 is actually the highest strength on any starter, but this is tied with a few others that could be subbed in if you wanted to. And of course we have both the strength and intelligence elixirs active as well. Going forward I will explain differences in the builds to keep things concise, but this is, as far as I found, the max possible strength build that also includes the important items like Hydra's and Deathbringer. Moving on though, we have another notorious crit god, this time one who physically could not crit in Smite 1. Yep, it's Sol. Sol's biggest crit came out to 1398 damage, and I won't spend too long on her because the build is identical to the one used for Jingway. The only difference being Sol's heat grants more of an overall boost than Jing's 2 does, so it edges her out slightly on the rankings. All things considered though, this is still a pretty normal crit user without anything too special beyond stat buffs inherent in her kit. Our next highest crit is actually a bit more interesting though, that being the Morrigan. Her total came out to 1630, and the reason I use total is because Morrigan's final hit of her attack chain deals 9% max health damage over time, which can crit in itself in addition to the regular basic attack. You've probably seen the funny haha Morrigan ADC crit builds from other content creators, and that bit of tick damage on the end is what pushes her beyond a more standard crit user like Sol or Jingway. She once again uses the exact same build, but due to some of this damage being max health based, this one has to be taken with a grain of salt. In testing, I gave the Ymir bot a full build of health only items to ensure the damage numbers weren't affected by giving him more protections. This one is difficult since I did bend the rules slightly by changing the Ymir bot to benefit Mori in the best way possible, as she's the only god on this list whose damage changes based on factors outside her control. Without all the max health items equipped to Ymir, this number would go down quite a bit, so just keep that in mind. Regardless though, this is impressive for a standard mage. Alright, moving to our next highest crit though, we have another interesting one, that being Modric. Going into this, I definitely expected Modric to rank pretty high, and the reason for that is his second and third hit of his chain using Clarent have 60% strength scaling, but more importantly 100% intelligence scaling, which is pretty nuts given how you can get roughly 2 times as much int per item slot compared to strength. In total, Modric's Clarent crit came in at 1667 damage. The build is very different here of course since he's looking to max out int, not strength. However, strength is still decent for boosting his crits at 60% on Clarent, so a double stacking Book of Thoth and Transcendence build was the way to go go here. He uses Dreamer's Idol instead of Avatar's Parachute to boost Int by 20% instead of Strength, the obligatory Deathbringer and Hydras for their boosts, Necronomicon which gives a whopping 200 intelligence when fully stacked, and finally the starter was Pendulum of the Ages as it gives the most possible Int of any starter item in the game. Using this build and his Clarent hits, Modric ranks pretty damn high on this crit list, but don't worry, there are still a few more that can out-crit him. Such as our next god, Zeus, who achieved a whopping 1778 crit by utilizing his 60% basic attack damage boost on targets with 3 charges. The build is identical to the one previously used on strength gods like Jing and Sol, so this massive crit is carried entirely on the back of that huge 60% boost, which of course stacks with Hydras and is applied to the actual basic attack itself, therefore is boosted by crit multiplier. ADC Zeus gang, rise up, and let's move on to our penultimate god for the crit list. And this one was pretty surprising to me when I did the testing. Athena actually comes in huge with a whopping 1801 crit using her passive reach basic attack. In Smite 2, Athena's reach doesn't scale like a regular basic attack, which are 100% strength, 20% int. Reach scales at 125% strength and 70% int, which already rivals, if not exceeds, Modric's Clarent basic attack, but reach also gets a 25% damage boost to the first target hit, pushing the crit numbers even further into the stratosphere. The build is a mostly intelligence-based one, since despite reach having more strength scaling overall, the availability of intelligence means you get more overall damage by building this way. But the strength scaling is still absurdly high, so we do throw in a Transcendence in there to synergize with the Book of Thoth, which gives us a decent bit of strength alongside Deathbringer and Hydras. The rest of the build was Necronomicon, which as mentioned earlier gives 200 int when fully stacked, Dreamer's Idol for the 20% active int boost, and Pendulum as our starter due to it giving the most intelligence of any starter in the game. All that power combined gives Athena the second largest crit in the entire game at 1801 damage. But finally, the moment you've all been waiting for.
Hi!
Yep, who else would it be at the top spot other than this frostbite abusing world giant with his absolutely thick 1980 damage crit? In Smite 2, Ymir's frostbite debuff makes enemies take 175% strength and 35% int from his basic attacks, rather than the normal 100% strength and 20% int. And this of course is applied first directly to the basic attack damage, so is boosted by crit and Hydras. For the build in general is heavily strength focused, but due to the 35% int scaling, we are going to throw in a Book of Thoth as the best way to boost damage due to its synergy with giving more mana to Transcendence, and giving a ton of int in itself that adds some extra damage to his autos. Other than that, it's the usual stuff like Deathbringer and Hydras, Death Metal for stats, Parachute for the 20% strength boost, and Death's Embrace for the most strength starter in the game, which all totaled up gives Ymir the largest crit in Smite 2 right now at 1980 damage. But there you go, that's some of the most insane crits you can land in Smite 2 as of patch CA3. There's definitely some gods that could break this record as they get ported, so if anything major changes with items, systems, or new gods, I'll look at remaking this video further down the line. But right now, I thought it was pretty interesting to take a look at. Catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.